Welcome to Novara Live. Coming up tonight, Prince Andrew is out of police custody as information about his relationship to Peter Mandelson comes to light. I'll be joined by Green Party candidate Hannah Spencer as a new poll shows her winning the Gordon and Denton by-election. Also, we've got a preview of my interview with journalist Paul Holden, who was recently the target of a smear campaign by Labour Together. We ask whether Andrew's links to Epstein could spell the end of the monarchy, and the Supreme Court has struck down Donald Trump's global tariffs. It's certainly a big news day, and I'm delighted to be joined by Barry Malone.
Hi, good to be here.
A real pro.
It's been a while.
It has been a while.
Also, you know, usually when I'm here, I feel like we're about to talk about really miserable things, but we've had Andrew arrested. We've had all of the Filton 24 but one bailed.
True.
We have Hannah Spencer out in the lead in the latest opinion poll in Gordon. What's happening?
And free trade is back on.
Whoopee.
Apparently. If you'd like to support our work, you can sign up at novaramedia.com/support. Thursday was a long day for the man formerly known as Prince Andrew, who spent 11 hours in police custody after his arrest on suspicion of misconduct in public office. And it was this image of a shell-shocked Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor leaving Aylsham police station last night that dominated almost every newspaper front page today. It's no surprise Andrew looks so haunted. He's the first member of the royal family to be arrested in 350 years, and the first sibling of a monarch to be detained since Elizabeth I. And while Andrew hasn't been formally charged with any wrongdoing, the search of his former home, the Royal Lodge in Windsor Great Park, has continued through its second day. The investigation is believed to involve allegations that Andrew sent confidential government information to the dead billionaire and child sexual abuser Jeffrey Epstein during the period that the former royal was the British government's trade envoy. And it's now emerged that Andrew may have got that job with little help from another Epstein friend. Mandelson, the former British ambassador to Washington, who is himself under police investigation for his links to Epstein, is said to have pushed for Andrew to be given the job back in 2001. Andrew's brother Charles, now the king of course, was apparently not keen. So Peter Mandelson here, a man of excellent judgment, always, never puts a foot wrong. The headline there was from the Telegraph, but the story was first published in Private Eye. The magazine says this. The appointment of Andrew to replace the Duke of Kent as trade envoy was vigorously promoted by none other than Peter Mandelson, then out of government after his second cabinet resignation, but still with the ear of the Prime Minister Tony Blair. Blair overruled the principal opponent of the plan, none other than Andrew's big brother. Charles thought it wrong-headed, as he suspected Andrew would use the post as an excuse to cultivate friendships with the wealthy, chase women and play golf. It would certainly be interesting to see the notes revealing why Blair ignored His Majesty's sage advice at the time. So Charles knew his brother much better than Mandelson did, or maybe Mandelson didn't care. Charles wasn't the only one with a good sense of the future. So in April 2001, this is interesting, The Guardian asked whether Prince Andrew's appointment to the international role was another royal accident waiting to happen, given his notorious playboy lifestyle at the time. That article also contained this piece of information. So they say, there have been sightings apparently showing Prince Andrew's return to playboy habits outside Soho clubs like China White, at glitterati bashes in Los Angeles, or turning up at a hookers and pimps Halloween party in New York. Central to the reinvention has been the Prince's partner at the New York party, Ghislaine Maxwell, daughter of the late disgraced media mogul, an association that caused concern among palace aides. In recent months, the pair have spent a lot of time together in a lifestyle that has revived doubts about the Prince's suitability to be the international representative of British industry. And this is very interesting, right? Because it doesn't tell you why palace aides were concerned by Andrew's association with Maxwell in 2001. So it's just as they were concerned about this. But, you know, the conviction for Epstein only happens in the mid-noughties. So what is it that they knew? Obviously, lots of rumours that this was a hush-hush, wink-wink secret for a very long time. And the fact that sort of they're already raising this as a concern is interesting. Ghislaine Maxwell is, of course, currently serving a 20-year jail sentence for her role in child sex trafficking for Epstein. At the time of the appointment, of Andrew, Mandelson is said to have described him as, quote, well qualified. But at some point, Mandelson also appears to have warned Epstein about getting too close to Andrew. So much later in the day here, and we're fast forwarding a number of years. So this is an email from 2015 from Jeffrey Epstein to Mandelson. And Epstein says, I guess you are right that my association friendship with Andrew would come to no good deed. Sultan is excited, Ryu. Hope you are well. So it's interesting. I mean, obviously there is 14 years in between the two pieces of advice, but it's interesting that Peter Mandelson at one point for Andrew was good enough to represent Britain, but not good enough to be Jeffrey Epstein's friend. So far, police looking into Andrew haven't said whether their investigations will involve sort of allegations about sex trafficking. Former Prime Minister Gordon Brown has now asked the police, though, to widen their investigation, releasing this statement yesterday. So he says, I have submitted a 5-page memorandum to the Metropolitan, Surrey, Sussex, Thames Valley and other relevant UK police constabularies. This memorandum provides new and additional information to that which I submitted last week to the Met, Essex and Thames Valley police forces, where I expressed my concern that we secure justice for trafficked girls and women. So what evidence did Brown hand to police last week? Well, in a New Statesman article published on the 11th of February, Brown details how he tracked 90 flights organised by Epstein through British airports, potentially carrying trafficked girls from across Europe, as well as a number of British girls aboard the so-called Lolita Express. Now, in that article, Brown also said this. The emails tell us in graphic detail how Epstein was able to use Stansted Airport. He boasted how cheap the airport charges were compared to Paris to fly in girls from Latvia, Lithuania and Russia. His messages link at least one to Britain and the former Prince Andrew. One email headed "The Girl" described her as, quote, just turned 18, 179 centimetres, very cute, speaks English. I saw her in real 3 years ago. I will send you the video in next email. So she's just turned 18 now. He saw her in, I suppose, real life 3 years ago. That's when she's 15. For many, all these connections are proving too much. Andrew has already been stripped of his royal titles and his honours, but he still remains 8th in line of succession to the throne. Now, it would take a very major incident to make him king. It would involve the deaths of both William and Harry and all of their children. Most Brits, though, no longer want to take that risk. So YouGov polling published today shows that 82% of Brits think Andrew should be removed from the royal line of succession, with 12% saying they don't know. You have to wonder who the 6% are. I mean, in any poll, if you ask people, would you marry a zombie, you'll get about 3% saying yes, because it's sort of like how polls work, with people sort of just randomly clicking. Or I suppose treating it as a joke. Maybe some of them do want, maybe some of them believe in tradition and think that just because you're wrong, it doesn't mean you shouldn't be able to one day become king.
Well, according to YouGov, 3% of Britons have a favourable opinion of Andrew still. So maybe they're the same 2% who would marry a zombie. Yeah, probably.
What does it tell us? I mean, obviously there's lots of years separating these stories. I'm not sure if there is really any suggestion that Mandelson and Andrew knew each other. Sort of what we know of Mandelson's relationship with Epstein seems to be, a bit later than 2001 anyway. But what does it tell us that it was Mandelson who encouraged the government to appoint Andrew against the advice of Andrew's brother Charles? Like, what is it about Peter Mandelson that he just keeps popping up in all of these stories?
I don't know. I mean, you're right. We don't know that Andrew, Mandelson and Epstein were hanging out in 2001. I think Andrew already had his friendship with Epstein pre-2001, but you're right, Mandelson's came maybe a year or two later. But they did move in similar circles. For example, they were both friends with Lord Rothschild, I believe. They'd spent time with him together. What we've really learned in the last few weeks, right, is how much Mandelson wanted to associate himself with the wealthy and the elites. And Andrew, even though he's a prince himself, had a lot of that to him too, in wanting to move with powerful people, move with wealthy people. And so I think they did know each other, right? So there is that. But I do find the fact that that was so long ago really, really interesting for a couple of reasons. You know, some people have been saying that putting Andrew into that position is a nonsense, that it's not a real job. I don't quite buy that. There is some method to the madness, right? He's not qualified. Like, we know that. We know that he's got no expertise in international trade. But the qualification that he had is that he's a royal. His royalism gave him the qualification because Britain wanted to leverage that soft power, right? Where you can send a royal out somewhere and he can shake hands and everybody is dazzled by the fact that it's Prince Andrew who's come to see them. And I think back in the early 2000s, I mean, it's still the case now, but Britain was really looking to get investment from, for example, Gulf monarchies, right? I know that Saudi Arabia was in play then, Bahrain was in play there. Then he went to both of those countries, I think, several times. You know, they were looking for Gulf investment in the UK. They're looking to secure contracts for British businesses in the Gulf. And they're looking to sell arms to Gulf monarchies, right? Because to the British government, and arms are just commodities like anything else. And, you know, to have a prince go over there and extol the virtues of British fighter jets, you know, for Gulf monarchies, that actually matters, right? So there is some sense to giving him that job. However, it came with so many risks. And we know that from the private eye reporting that his own brother, as you said, understood those risks and didn't think it was a good idea to put him in the role. And if you isolate the golf, right, forget the golf, that he would spend all his time playing golf. The other two things that Charles said were that he would chase women and that he would want to build relationships with wealthy people. That's exactly what it appears that he did. And that's not speculation from me. There is lots of reporting going back 25 years from 2001 to 2011, because also he was in that job for a decade. There's a lot of reporting that shows that he got up to some questionable things when he was in that job. I actually jotted a couple of them down. He was very close friends with Saif al-Islam Gaddafi, the son of Muammar Gaddafi, who was actually murdered in Libya a couple of weeks ago. I wrote a piece for The Observer about this where I actually spoke about the relationship between Andrew and Saif and Mandelson and Saif because they all knew each other socially. He was also friends with Tarek Ketouni, who is a Libyan gun smuggler. He was also very close to a man called Sakr al-Materi, who was the son-in-law of Ben Ali, the then dictator of Tunisia, who Andrew had to Buckingham Palace in 2011, around the time of the Tunisian Revolution. Then there was a lot of reporting on his activities in Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan, including by BBC. In 2010, it emerged that the son-in-law of the Kazakh president had bought a mansion from Andrew, Sunning Hill Park, for £15 million. Guess what the asking price was?
Yes, well, 3 million. Yeah, whatever.
That's 3 million over
he
the
overpaid
odds.
3 million. I saw that.
When does that happen?
That's crazy.
When does that? You know what? I like the house so much. I'm going to pay you £3 million
nothing
more
dodgy
than
going
you
on
want.
here
No,
at
but
all.
you know, and again, I mean, I guess we have to say nobody was convicted of any crime, but it bloody stinks.
I mean, it more than stinks. If someone is overpaying you £3 million for
Right?
a house who you met on a government job.
But I don't want to. I want to come back to the Charles thing, right? Because 2001 was 25 years ago. 25 years ago, Charles was talking, according to that private eye report, about chasing women, about cozying up to wealthy people, and about how he was unfit for that role, apparently. Now, look at Question Time last night. Look at the press over the last couple of days. They've been talking about how King Charles acted swiftly. You know, King Charles acted swiftly. He stripped Andrew of his titles. He removed him from his official role. You know, this must be very, very embarrassing for the king. How did he act swiftly when, according to that private eye report, he knew who Andrew was 25 years ago? He knew who his brother was 25 years ago. And are we to suppose that the Queen didn't know who Andrew was? Are we to assume that everybody else in Buckingham Palace didn't know? Are we to assume the civil service didn't know? The government of the day didn't know? The officials and apparatchiks in Buckingham Palace didn't know? given what Charles has said. So did Charles act swiftly, or do we have a situation where this guy has been enabled by the British establishment, including Charles and everybody else associated with the royal family, for a quarter of a century?
It's funny, isn't it? Playboy. It's always Playboy until it becomes sex trafficker.
Right, exactly.
There's sort of like this switch, and you can go back to all the reporting, which seems to be intimating towards something kind of nasty going on.
Chasing women.
Morgan McSweeney might be out of Downing Street, but the organisation he founded is still in the headlines this week. The Guardian are reporting that a Labour minister falsely linked journalists to a pro-Kremlin network in emails to GCHQ. The Labour minister in question is Josh Simons, who was then head of Labour Together. And as we found out earlier this week, it was Simons who secretly hired a US firm called APCO to smear journalists who had published critical coverage into his organisation. Now, the journalists included Gabriel Pogrund and Harry York at the Sunday Times, who in 2023 had reported on Labour Together's failure to disclose £700,000 worth of donations. The journalists also included Paul Holden, who had provided Pogrund and York with much of the evidence used in their expose on Labour Together. The investigation that was paid for by Labour Together into Pogrund, York and Holden was uncovered by Peter Geoghegan on his Substack, Democracy for Sale, at the start of this month. That explained how APCO had been paid over £30,000 to investigate the journalists and generate narratives that would discredit their work. And what's new in the Guardian piece are details about how Simons used APCO's investigations to try and persuade GCHQ, so Britain's spy agency, to open an investigation into the sourcing of the Sunday Times piece and the personal life of Paul Holden. And according to emails now made public, Simons told GCHQ about Holden's personal relationships, which he falsely suggested meant he had connections to Russian intelligence. He also accused Holden of being part of a far-left network which disseminates pro-Russian propaganda. Sort of echoes of Paul Mason there. And referring to the emails Holden provided to the Sunday Times, Simons said this. Again, this is in an email to Britain's spy agency. So Simons writes, "We do not believe that any of the sensitive and closely guarded Labour Together information was leaked by an insider. We believe we have been the victim of a hack by hostile actors as the information was disseminated to pro-Russian journalists linked to other hack and leak operations. We believe that the likeliest culprit is the Russian state or proxies of the Russian state." Now, CCHQ were not impressed with the spurious evidence presented by Simons. No official investigation was opened. Paul Holden, for his part, has always been completely adamant that all of his sources were just sort of normal Labour internal sources. He's shown The Guardian, The Times, The Telegraph, his sources. They're happy with them. Earlier today, I spoke to Paul Holden. He's the author of The Fraud, Keir Starmer, Morgan McSweeney and the Crisis of British Democracy. And we spoke for over an hour, and we'll be putting out that interview tomorrow. Really, really stunning stuff, amazing details, amazing journalist. We'll now just show you a sort of segment of the conversation with Paul explaining how Josh Simons responded to his critical reporting of Labour Together.
What we can gather from the timeline is that slightly before then, Josh Simons has gotten this mad report written by some madman in South Africa, this 58-page report, which basically paints me and Gabriel Pogrund and Harry York and Matt Taibbi and my colleague Andrew Weinstein, who I've been working with for 15 years, as part of like a globalist Russian conspiracy. Like totally mad nonsense rubbish, but like just like BS to like the ultimate degree, right? And they've taken that report and they've extracted certain information from it, and they've gone to go complain to the National Cybersecurity Centre saying, we think Paul Holden is a threat to democracy because he's been handling Russian hacks, which is totally nonsense, right? As The Guardian's now confirmed today, my sourcing for my stories is internal Labour Party leaks, which if you're a journalist in the UK is like it's like a Tuesday to get leaks from within the Labour Party, right? And then 2 days later, I get an email from Pippa Crea saying The Guardian's about to run the story that's alleging that you're under investigation by the National Cybercrime Security Centre for handling these Russian hacks. And I write back and I say, this is absolutely absurd. What on earth are you talking about?
Because you weren't under investigation. All that had happened is that Josh Simons had sent them an email asking them to put you under investigation.
And the timeline's a bit unclear, but basically the National Cybercrime Security Centre said, go away.
Yeah.
Like there's nothing here. And of course, if you look at what they've actually said about me, so now the story that came out today in The Guardian, it reproduces what they sent to the National Cybercrime Security Centre, which I just saw for the first time as well. And it's mad stuff. It's really silly stuff, right? It's basically, we think that he's connected to journalists who've previously received hacks from Russia. I don't know what they're talking about. And second of all, he lives with his partner, Jessica Murray, who was the daughter of Andrew Murray, who was an advisor to Jeremy Corbyn, which is basically, these people are lefties, therefore they must be suspicious. Please go after them. And I think that's actually been one of the hardest things to deal with is that we now know from the Guardian reporting that one of the things that APCO did was find out where I lived and who I lived with. They used the software called Trace IQ to identify my family. It was extremely personal, an extremely personal attack on like my private life, which is, it's chilling to think that these people who are now in our government effectively were saying, yeah, you should go and use these data gathering tools to find out where this journalist lives and who he lives with, and how we can then use that to confect a complaint to the National Cyber Security Centre. It's sort of like a nightmare scenario, really. I mean, it's also this doubly ironic thing because Josh Simons is now in cabinet. One of his briefs is digital ID. You have the minister who's in charge of digital ID, who's employed a company which is using sophisticated data tracking techniques to identify where a journalist lives, so you can report him to security services. That
was journalist Paul Holden speaking to me earlier today. As I say, we'll be putting out a really long interview, sort of over an hour, goes into all the details. If you're confused about this story, check that out tomorrow. Phenomenal stuff. Barry, I suppose I want to go to you sort of on the broader point here. I mean, you've been in the journalism trade for a very long time. How unusual is this? So you've had a few critical journalists, and it has to be said, sort of, if it had just been left-wing journalists who had been investigated, I don't think the mainstream media would have really cared if it was just Paul Holden. But it's because Labour Together also went after Gabriel Pogrund and Harry York, two journalists at the Sunday Times, that now this has become a bit of a national scandal. And how unusual is it? You've got journalists write an awkward story for an organisation, and they go and pay a private company 30,000 quid to try and tarnish the reputation of those journalists asking awkward questions. Is that sort of something that journalists have to face a lot, or is this unusual?
I mean, I think it happens, right? And it happens in many, many different countries around the world. I have experience of it myself, but I had some stuff happen to me in Ethiopia. I had some stuff happen to me in Uganda, where I had stories put out about me in blogs, and one particularly bizarre story ran on Ethiopian television to undercut a story that I did about the killing of an opposition candidate. And instead of kind of counter whether or not that candidate had been killed, they attacked me. And so, that happens. I think that in this country and in other Western countries, we know that left-wing journalists have been targeted in the past, and we know that misinformation has been put out about them, and we know that information has been gathered about their work, but as you say, also their personal lives. But it's normally the intelligence agencies who does this, not some think tank, run by suits who seem to have all of a sudden decided that they're living in an episode of The Thick of It, or they've watched too many mafia films and they're going to take people down, they're going to take people out. It's bizarre.
That is the impression you get, that they love it, right? They love it. It's like, you go after us, we'll hire our shady organizations
exactly. We're
in the
going to
United
take you
States
down.
who will take you down.
It does. It feels like a movie. It feels absurd. And again, when I talk about how, look, we know, again, that in the US and here that there are left-wing journalists, radical journalists, like you say, if it hadn't have been for the fact that they went after people from the Sunday Times, I don't think this would be a huge issue. But again, it's usually the intelligence services who do this. And, do you mean
our intelligence services or intelligence services in other countries? Or
here. I think that there's been convincing reporting over the years that information has been gathered on radical, for desperate want of a different term, journalists who are deemed to be radical by the state, right? But to have this come out of like, okay, so for example, in Ireland in the 80s, we had a thing where a bunch of really, really prominent journalists some of the most prominent journalists in the country had their phones tapped. And one of the key questions that people were trying to kind of untangle was whether or not the government of the day knew about it, or whether it was just a special branch who had done it without the government
like
knowing.
The sort of over-enthusiastic special branch.
Exactly, or without the ruling party at the time knowing about it. But what we know here is that it's a think tank related to the Labour Party, and that people in the Labour Party were aware of this. And I think that's what makes this slightly different. And I mean, look, of course it's sinister that they would do this, but it's also kind of cack-handed. You know, and you know what I hope is happening, and I think is happening to a certain extent. I hope Paul sells more books off the back of this. You know, and he absolutely deserves to, because he's, as you say, he's an incredible investigative journalist, and he's one of the only people who's really dug into the influence of Labour together. So, you know, this might be something that could backfire. Yeah.
I mean, we were speaking to it because, you know, reading story, I often like to sort of steel man them. What's the other side here, right? And, you know, Oppo research is something that everyone does. Sort of like, oh, what's the motives behind this journalist? Da, da, da. But what's so sinister here is it wasn't like saying, oh, maybe you should take a second look at this journalist because X, Y, Z, put it in the public domain and then they can defend themselves. It was all secret. So basically it was all innuendo. So Labour Together were just secretly briefing journalists and politicians saying, oh, that guy, lots of dodgy stuff, and no right to reply at all, because it's all innuendo in a document, whilst also making, you know, everyone feel like they're being watched, or they're going after their wife and their family and stuff. Like it's really dark. And it is why it's so sinister is because you don't get a right of reply to a whispering campaign.
Yeah. And it's the personal life stuff. You know, go for his journalism if you can. You know, pull his journalism apart. Try and prove that he's a biased journalist. Try and prove that he's a journalist with an anti-Labour agenda who's on a witch hunt. You know, try and prove that there's some kind of nefarious motivation behind what he's doing. But also to go after personal life, to gather information on journalists' personal lives. That is so bloody sinister.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we often talk on this show, it's like a journalist is married to a politician, and you say, well, maybe da. But this was sinister. If you want to see how sinister it was, you can check out the interview that we'll be putting out tomorrow. It's less than a week until the crucial Gorton and Denton by-election, and polling suggests it's very much a free horse race. So the pollster Omnisis spoke to 452 people in the constituency. And when you remove undecideds, the Greens are first on 32%, Reform are second on 29%, and Labour are third on 26%, which means the Greens are favourite to win the seat, the bookies' favourites as well. And Hannah Spencer, is the favourite to become Gorton and Denton's new MP. And Hannah joins me again now. Welcome back to the show. Do you feel like you're the favourite in this race?
I do, yeah. And I'd say we have felt this for quite a long time. Like, we felt it in the conversations we're having with people and in the data we've got from canvassing, that it has felt like this is going to be the result. And I'm confident really that what we've been saying for a good number of weeks is correct, that we are going to win here.
I suppose that the difficulty or the challenge of sort of standing in a by-election, you didn't see it coming for obvious reasons. And you're now really a subject of national attention and national scrutiny. You know, you're being treated a little bit like a party leader by political journalists. How are you sort of adapting to that?
It's strange. Like, you know, the scrutiny and the accountability is absolutely fair when you're, you know, in a position like this. But I'm very much still just on the ground. I'm out talking to people. Like, I work, as you know, I work as a plumber. I've just qualified as a plasterer too. And like, the real life interactions that I'm still having with people is what's keeping me grounded and keeping me focused on why we need a Green MP in the North.
So I have prepared more questions, but I'm a little bit distracted by your background. Where are you? I can see hot bargains plastered on the boxes that you're sitting in front of.
I'm at a community iftar tonight, which is really nice. We're celebrating with all our friends and neighbours, and I've been fasting today. I've never fasted before, but it's Ramadan, and I thought it would be a really nice thing to try and sort of show solidarity with people. So yeah, we've come to a little iftar that's just been, our friends that we know have sort of got together, and we're celebrating, and we're definitely celebrating the results of the poll because it's just showing that what we're doing is working.
So second in that poll is Reform. Matt Goodwin, as far as I can tell, has been campaigning pretty hard in this seat, also been very active on social media. This is part of a clip he put up this week that I'm going to ask you to respond to.
Because what the Greens and Hannah Spencer are offering at this by-election is an extreme proposition. They want to legalise all drugs, including crack cocaine and heroin. Now, Gorton and Denton already has big problems with antisocial behaviour. Imagine what that would do to criminality and antisocial behaviour. Just go and Google what happened in places like Oregon and British Columbia when they tried that policy. It was a disaster. Authorities almost immediately changed their minds and they reversed it. And they want open borders. They want to flood places like Gorton and Denton with more illegal migrants, people entering Britain illegally. It's not divisive to say we shouldn't be doing this. It's responsible to say we should be putting the hard-working, tax-paying majority who are already here, people who are playing by the rules, from Longsight to Denton. People are saying to me, I feel a palpable sense of unfairness, that we have governments and parties and candidates like Hannah Spencer who are more interested in putting people who are breaking the rule of law ahead of the hard-working majority who are respecting it.
So I've been following sort of quite closely what you and Matt have been sort of saying on social media over the past couple of weeks. And it is quite clear that Matt Goodwin seems to think it's sort of the Greens' social policies that are the vulnerability in this election. So sort of talking about drug legalisation, talking about borders. Is that the sense you're getting on the doorstep when people are sort of sceptical about the Greens? Is it on those issues or...?
No, the number one thing people are still telling us about is cost of living, like how expensive it is to just exist in this society. Even here in Manchester, where we've got the fastest growing economy in the UK, where there is literally skyscraper after skyscraper going up that people in Gorton and Denton live in the shadow of, and we're seeing the rich get richer and everyone else get poorer. That's the thing that people are talking about, our broken NHS, the way that life has got harder, the way that our streets are filthy. Like, people are bothered about the things that are actually happening. And of course, we're having conversations about immigration. Like, it's understandable that people feel really cross about a system that's so broken. But I think every time he does a video like this, like, it just helps us because it really highlights how out of touch as an individual and as a party they are, because they're not on the ground. They're not aware of how bad drugs situation is here. If they were, they would be coming up with solutions to the problems, but they're not. They're just really out of touch.
And I suppose one of the things that Matt, because Matt Goodwin's talking a lot more about you than he is about the Labour Party. In a way, is that a gift to you? Because I suppose Labour and the Greens are both competing to say it's us versus Reform. And I suppose, is that the conversation you're having on the doorstep? Are you mainly telling people why Reform are bad, or are you mainly telling people why it's only the Greens that can beat Reform?
So the first thing that we're talking about genuinely is the solutions that we have to the problems that people are facing. So that is the thing that we're out on the doorsteps talking about. We are talking about how let down people feel by Labour, but that's because they're telling us that they don't want to vote Labour again. And when Reform comes up, it's often because people don't realise how extreme this candidate is. Like, they may have an idea about Reform in their head, but they simply do not know how extreme he's been in his views, whether that's about women and, saying that women who don't have or can't have children should be taxed more, like viewing young girls having biological reality checks, or talking about our Muslim neighbours, our immigrant communities in a really demonising way. Whatever it is that he's been talking about, people are quite appalled by. And yeah, it has been really clear to us from the outset that it was between us and Reform. And I think the fact that Reform is saying that now does show that they know that we're really gaining pace here, so much so that we're ahead in the polls. But I have to say too, lastly, that this poll is great because it confirms really what we've been thinking. But this last week is going to be the bit that makes it. And we know that Reform are going to throw absolutely everything at this. Like, they will do everything to discredit, undermine us. Like, there's so much misinformation about me guarantee out there. And the only way that we can counter that, and the only way that we can actually now win this, is people getting out on the streets. And so if anyone here is able to help, like, there's stuff every day. You can just Google Green Party Action Days. It will all come up. Like, if you can chip in, that is what we need to win, because it's like we've come so close, so close, but it's not guaranteed. It's not in the bag. We need to keep getting out there, and we need to keep talking to people.
All right, Hannah, thank you for joining me. I'll let you escape what looks like a utility cupboard and get back to your iftar.
Thank you so much.
There's been some very big international economic news this afternoon. The US Supreme Court has struck down many of US President Donald Trump's most sweeping global tariffs in a 6-3 ruling. The judges in the US's highest court have said that Trump misused a law in imposing the stinging trade tariffs. The ruling could mean the federal government is forced to repay billions of dollars in tariff refunds. Now, it's a major victory for the small businesses and states that had challenged the measures through the courts over the last year, with Democrats and even many Republicans lauding the ruling. Last year, Trump invoked legislation empowering the president to regulate trade during an economic emergency. So it's a law called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. I mean, it was by invoking that law that Trump was, well, he thought he was able, I suppose, to provide a legal justification for unilaterally putting tariffs on goods from China, Mexico, Canada, and then everywhere on so-called Liberation Day. That all looks like it could now be undone. And as you can imagine, Trump didn't take the news very well. This is from CNN. President Trump received news of the Supreme Court ruling striking down his tariffs via a note while hosting a White House breakfast with governors and called it a disgrace. According to people familiar with his remarks, he told those gathered that he has a backup plan in mind, according to one of those people. Another person familiar with his remarks said Trump became enraged at the breakfast and started attacking the courts at one point, saying, "These effing courts." Trump is currently giving a news briefing, I think, but we're not able to get you those clips, as it is a bit of a skeleton crew today. Barry, this is quite a big deal. Like, the tariffs were, I mean, really the centerpiece of Donald Trump's second presidency, I suppose, as well as the ICE raids. It's one of the things that sort of separated the second presidency from the first one. The first one sort of rhetorically was very extreme, but he wasn't in a position, I suppose, to try and create as radical a policy agenda as he has been this time around. This was a 6-3 ruling on a Supreme Court which is 6-3 conservative. So this does seem like a significant limit to his power on a policy which has been a central plank of his sort of whole presidential term. This is a big deal.
Yeah, I think it's huge because, as you say, this is huge for him. This is a pet policy. This is something that he's talked about, I would argue, more than any other policy almost since he came in for the second term. And it was something that he really hit the ground running with, right? On Liberation Day, I think people were really taken aback. The markets were taken aback. US allies were taken aback. And the amount of tariffs that have been imposed under this IEEPA mechanism that you mentioned, the value of it is pretty huge. I think according to the latest data, it's $134 billion of tariffs that have been gathered under that act, which now we know people are going to scramble to get back. Corporations are going to want back. Small businesses are going to want back. That's a mess. And I think that Brett Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court, who I think he said this evening that it will be a mess when people try and get that money back. And it could spell absolute chaos for the US economy. I think stocks ticked up a little after the ruling because I guess I guess Trump's unpredictability around tariffs has been quite destabilizing for the market. But, you know, it's bad for him politically. It's potential chaos for the US economy. But I think what's also interesting is it removes a sort of a political cudgel, right? Because he hasn't just been using tariffs economically, although they've been a massive bugbear of his since before he was even president. Trump has been gone on about tariffs for 40, 50 years, all through his business career. But, but they were a huge foreign policy cudgel as well, right? So he imposed tariffs on India when India bought Russian oil. He imposed tariffs on Brazil over the prosecution of Jair Bolsonaro, the former president. And I think he put the fear of God into US eyes with the unpredictability of what he might do under this mechanism. And now that's been taken away from him. So I think what we have is a really big economic story, but also quite a big political story and quite a big foreign policy story.
Huge. I mean, because this is what Donald Trump, this has been his leverage. So when most of the issues when it came to sort of like NATO and the big falling out between Europe, Canada and America, is when Donald Trump threatened to impose tariffs if they didn't give him Greenland. Like at every single opportunity, if he's had an international disagreement, he hasn't said, he's tweeted, I will put a 25% tariff on you unless you agree with me. Now, obviously, the Supreme Court is saying you don't have the right to do that.
Yeah.
It's only Congress who can put up a tariff. And that means that he can't just make policy on the hoof on his phone, because you have to go to Congress, and actually the legislators there probably won't agree to tariffs anyway, because if there's anything that some of them will rebel on when it comes to Trump, it is things which protect business. So, I mean...
Right, that's the other thing. Like, it's affected small business owners in the US.
Yeah,
it's affected small importers. It hasn't helped ordinary Americans. It hasn't helped small business owners. It's hindered them. And I think Elizabeth Warren said when the ruling was announced that massive corporations with their lawyers and their lobbyists may be in a very good position to get their money back. And I know Costco had already begun a case to get some of the tariffs that it was forced to pay back. But, your average small importer, it's going to be much more difficult for them. So again, I think it's one of these things where, Trump likes to position himself as the great man of the people and then introduces these headline policies that actually don't help ordinary Americans. But I totally agree with you about, the massive element of that being his real foreign policy lever. It worked. That's the other thing. It kind of worked. It did terrify people.
So Donald Trump has already said that he will be imposing a 10% global tariff via another statute. So it's the Supreme Court has ruled that using the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to impose tariffs is illegal. He's saying that he's going to impose a 10% tariff using Section 122, which was created by the 1974 Trade Act. Now, I'm not going to pretend to you that I know what Section 122 of the 1974 Trade Act is. So I'm not going to be able to form any kind of judgment on the spot as to whether or not that will be ruled legal. I suppose the danger here for me, so there's been lots of sort of leaders in Europe, in North America, maybe in sort of the parts of East Asia that were allied with America, who've been hoping that something will come to the rescue. So there's been sort of people arguing, look, you need to get used to this new reality where you can't rely on the United States. You're going to have to start hedging your bets, get closer relations with China, onshore some key strategic industries. I think there have been other people saying, hopefully something will come up, because like changing strategy is hard, becoming economically independent is really hard. Like, surely the Supreme Court will come and save us. And I think there will be lots of people in Brussels, in Westminster, in Canada saying, oh, phew, all of that hard thinking we were having to do about coming up with our own geopolitics, about coming up with our own sort of national economic strategies, we don't have to do anymore, because the Supreme Court have come to the rescue and we can pretend that everything's just normal.
Back into Uncle Sam's embrace.
Yeah, exactly. And I think... it goes without saying that would be a mistake.
Well, exactly. But also, he's not giving up, it sounds like, from what he's just said. I mean, which I think shows that he's still completely unpredictable on this. Yeah,
completely unpredictable. I mean, the New York Times are already saying this is the Supreme Court asserting its independence. So, people saying there's an extent to which this is showing that the checks and balances, to at least some degree, work. We'll talk a lot about this on Monday, I assume, because by then we'll know sort of what other means there are available to Donald Trump when it comes to imposing his tariffs. Maybe even by then I'll learn what this Section 122 of the 1974 Trade Act knows.
There's some good live blogs out there. Sorry to interrupt you. If people want to dig into the complexities of this, Reuters is running one on their website right now.
The fall of Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor may well trigger the biggest constitutional crisis in recent British history. As the brother of the king, Andrew has spent his life surrounded by servants, aides, royal family members and government officials, and as allegations of his involvement in Jeffrey Epstein's trade in young girls and women swirl, it's hard to believe that, if they turn out to be true, those around Andrew knew nothing of what he's alleged to have been doing. Any sense of a cover-up or protecting Andrew from the consequences of his alleged actions could spell the end of the monarchy. But some don't see it that way. Veteran BBC journalist Jonathan Dimbleby is also the King's friend and biographer. He spoke to the BBC after Andrew's arrest on Thursday.
He is the King's brother, and I wonder what you think about the damage that this does to the royal family, to the monarchy.
I don't think that it damages the monarchy. I think we have to separate the notion of a family from the institution of the monarchy. I think it's very important. It's very easy to align the two. And I have to say in parentheses, I think that the former Duke of Edinburgh used the most unfortunate phrase when he talked about the family business. It's not a family business, first of all. Secondly, if you take the individuals, the senior, the King mentioned, didn't he, that all the family would continue to help. If you think of the Prince and Princess of Wales, the Princess Royal, the Duke of Edinburgh, they are all doing their duties. They will individually have feelings about this. I do not see that because one member of the royal family has been arrested, maybe, we don't know, maybe charged with a very serious offence, that brings the institution in disrespect. On the contrary, it demonstrates that the institution is functioning.
In one way, Dimbleby is right. The institution is functioning, and that's because the single job of the monarchy is to sustain itself at whatever cost. This time, the cost is Andrew. But for years, it may have been girls and young women.
I'm in London. I was so young. Ghislaine woke me up in the morning and said, "You're going to meet a prince today." I didn't know at that point that I was going to be trafficked to that prince. And then that night, Prince Andrew came to her house in London, and we went out to Club Tramp. Prince Andrew got me alcohol. It was in the VIP section. I'm pretty sure it was vodka. Prince Andrew was like, "Let's dance together." And I was like, okay. And we leave Club Tramp, and I hop in the car with Ghislaine and Jeffrey, and Ghislaine said, "He's coming back to the house, and I want you to do for him what you do for Epstein." I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that even royalty were involved.
That was Virginia Giuffre in 2019, recounting her allegations of being trafficked to Andrew by Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell in 2001, when she was just 17 years old. She claimed that on 3 separate occasions Andrew raped her, including in 2001 in London. Andrew, of course, has denied all of those claims. In a 2022 civil suit brought by Giuffre against the then prince, though, Andrew settled for an undisclosed amount, stipulating that the settlement was not an admission of guilt. Later reports would put the settlement at around £12 million. So where did he get that cash from? Well, it seems to have been a family affair. Earlier this month, The Sun reported that Andrew was loaned the £12 million by his mother, the then Queen, the estate of his father, Prince Philip, and his brother, Charles, now the King. A source told The Sun this: Andrew lied to his own family about the extent of his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. They bankrolled his payoff to his accuser, Virginia Giuffre. They bought his lies and helped him try and make the problem go away. His own mother, the late Queen, was left heartbroken by the scandal, but she could not face banishing Andrew, who was still her beloved son. Andrew, well, if we're to believe he lied to his family, he didn't only lie to his family, he may have lied to the country too. Virginia Giuffre alleged that this photograph that she said was taken in 2001 proved that she was telling the truth about being assaulted by Andrew when she was 17. In the background is Ghislaine Maxwell. Now, here's what Andrew said about the photo in his notorious 2019 Panorama interview with Emily Maitlis.
She provided a photo of the two of you together.
Yes.
Your arm was around her waist.
Yes.
You've seen the photo.
I've seen the photograph.
How do you explain that?
I can't. Because I have absolutely no memory of that photograph ever being taken.
Do you recognise yourself in the photo?
Yeah, it's pretty difficult not to recognise yourself.
Your friend suggested that the photo is fake.
I think it's, from the investigations that we've done, you can't prove whether or not that photograph is faked or not, because It is a photograph of a photograph of a photograph. So it's very difficult to be able to prove it. But I don't remember that photograph ever being taken.
But it's possible that it was you with your arm around
That's
her
me, but whether that's my hand or whether that's the position, I have simply no recollection of a photograph ever being taken.
So I mean, beyond that, just being grotesque and implausible, it's that phrase, the investigations we've done, that sort of stand out to me there. Now, it very much sounds like there are many people working for Andrew who are actively trying to build a case that Giuffre was lying about the picture. You know, in other words, there may have been many people working to protect Andrew's reputation, right, which is the job of people who work for the royal family, to defend the institution, to defend their reputations. Now, as it happened, there's good evidence now in the Epstein files to suggest the photograph was, in fact, real. In a 2015 email exchange between Maxwell and Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell is working on the text of a witness statement about Virginia Giuffre's accusations. Maxwell denies the sexual allegations, but does say this. In 2001, I was in London when Virginia Giuffre met a number of friends of mine, including Prince Andrew. A photograph was taken as I imagine she wanted to show it to friends and family. Right, so clearly this is a real picture. Ghislaine Maxwell, in her defense, is going for the argument, yes, this all happened, well, this is in this meeting happened, but I didn't force anyone to have sex. Andrew's strategy is to say the picture never happened in the first place. And as was made clear in that interview with Emily Maitlis, he's had lots of people who've done these investigations to try and clear his name. If Andrew was being helped by palace staff to protect his reputation from Giuffre's allegations, it might not have been the first time. So in 2011, the Mail on Sunday approached palace staff over their plan to run the photograph of Andrew and Giuffre. This is an exchange between Andrew and the Queen's Deputy Press Secretary. So that's pretty significant, I think. So you can see here, Andrew, I've just had a short conversation with Ghislaine, and she says, with what Jeffrey Epstein says, XX is a lying so-and-so, paraphrasing, but this is consistent. I assume the XX is Virginia Giuffre. If this comes to the crunch, we must have a statement ready for tomorrow or tonight that makes it perfectly clear our displeasure with the Mail on Sunday for not listening and a really forceful denial. Press Secretary, indeed, sir, all received, awaiting their response now. Lawyers primed. Next email. Andrew, it would also seem she has a criminal record in the States. I have given her date of birth and social security number for investigation with Chris on the duty PPO. Private, personal, I'm not sure what PPO is. And then the press secretary says, the Mail on Sunday have now come back to us and say they will make no reference to any sexual impropriety. This is a good start. But we need to know what they will run instead. If it's simply that you met this woman, well, frankly, as in sort of frankly, that's ridiculous. So this is the official royal staff trying to, I suppose, support Andrew and I think pressure really the Mail on Sunday to make their stories more favourable towards Andrew. We know how the royal press works. They sort of say, if you write this about us, we won't give you any more access. So the idea this sort of had nothing to do with the royal family, to me, doesn't bear, it's not credible, basically. Andrew, this is interesting. Andrew immediately forwarded that entire exchange to Jeffrey Epstein. So that's why we have them in the Epstein files, because he forwarded this information to Epstein. Of course, this is long after he was convicted of sex offences. I mean, it appears on the surface to show not only the Queen's press secretary negotiating with the Mail to stop them running a photo of Andrew, an alleged sex trafficking victim, but also Andrew asking a personal protection officer, that's what the PPO was, a member of the Met Police to investigate Giuffre. We don't know if the officer ever did, but Andrew doesn't appear to have been afraid to ask. This is a man very much used to getting his own way. Other Met protection officers have a few stories to tell about Andrew. In 2022, 60 Minutes Australia interviewed Andrew's former protection officer, Paul Page, who gave this account of young women frequently visiting the then Prince.
A lady would turn up, she would say, I'm here to see Prince Andrew. We would call his valet or his footman. They would usually come down and meet the anonymous female and take them into the palace. Sometimes we would let them walk across the forecourt into the middle of the palace where the Duke's private door is, and they would make their own way to his apartments. On one occasion, a female attended the North Centre Gate and said she was here to see Prince Andrew. He'd just come in half an hour before, so we knew he was in residence, but we couldn't get hold of his valet or his footman, so we had no confirmation, because we do get people turn up at the palace saying I've got an appointment for the Queen. They haven't. They're just sort of mentally challenged. So there's that issue we have as well. People can turn up and say they're here for an appointment, but they haven't got one. So we politely apologised to the female and said, look, we can't let you in at the moment. We need to get confirmation. So she said, oh, I'll ring him on my mobile. So she rang Prince Andrew on her mobile, and he must have been looking out the window, because there was 3 of us standing there. One of my colleagues was quite a large officer, and he's the one who took the phone off the lady. And we could hear Prince Andrew. I mean, I don't know if you want me to use the expletives, but basically he said, listen to me, you fat lardy-ass cunt. Let my guest in, I'm going to come down there. We all heard it, and even the female guest went bright red. So obviously we apologised to her, she apologised to us, and we just let her in.
Oh my God. Prince Andrew, really a man without any redeeming features whatsoever. I blame the upbringing. And the interview went on.
There was a constant flow of females visiting Prince Andrew late in the evening, whom we were not privy to their names.
So, what amongst the protection officers, what was the banter about Prince Andrew and his entourage of women, the number that were coming in?
We obviously thought it was a bit of a boy, and the joke was he should have a revolving door in his bedroom. You know, it was that sort of attitude. I mean, he would get his protection officers to drive some of these females home. And to be quite honest with you, last time I looked, Royal Protection Command isn't the taxi service. So he misused police resources for his own ends. But obviously, protection officers aren't going to say no. They're going to do what they're told.
Now, we should be clear that the protection officer interviewed there says he put the ages of all the girls who visited Andrew at 20 or older. But as the investigation into Andrew grows, protection officers will now be questioned over his Epstein links, with officers being asked to consider carefully whether they ever saw or heard anything relevant to the case. Others around Andrew may have had more material incentives to turn a blind eye. Andrew's ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson, who continued to live with the prince after their divorce, appears to have benefited financially from a relationship with Epstein. On one occasion in 2001, she received $150,000 from the billionaire, though a spokesperson for the former Duchess said the money related to share options she had earned as an ambassador for Weight Watchers. Even in 2010, though, just months after Epstein was released from house arrest following a child sex conviction, Ferguson wrote to him to express her gratitude for his generosity and kindness. "I am at your service," she says at the end of the email. "Then just marry me." There's no suggestion that Ferguson or any palace staff or acquaintances of Andrew have done anything criminal. Indeed, Andrew continues to deny all criminal allegations of wrongdoing. It does perhaps, though, illustrate a major issue around secrets and the monarchy, money, power, authority, and the state's almost limitless protection of members of the royals, which can make people do strange things. It may even help them to ignore what was under their noses all along. Barry, we'll be quick because we need to wrap up the show quite quickly. But this idea that this has nothing to do with the broader palace, that this is sort of Prince Andrew, he's one rotten egg. No one in the palace could have known. What could they possibly have known? And the minute they found out that wrongdoing had happened, they pushed him out of the family. I don't find it particularly plausible.
No, me neither. And this is the line. This is the line that's coming from the palace, but it's also the line that seems to be coming from the majority of the mainstream British media. What Jonathan Dimbleby said that, look, it's the one bad apple defence, right? And last night in Question Time, we saw the same thing. Everybody on Question Time said, this is one person, the institution is in good health. What they're going to do is they're going to lean on the fact that they have William and Kate, who are still incredibly popular with the British public. And then I think there's this other thing that I find quite insidious, which is the notion that it's a family and that it's family business. You know, why should William be made to answer questions for his uncle? Why should Charles be embarrassed by his brother? But it's not just a family. It's this weird melding of a family with the state. And William... And
also, if we say that families are relevant, you're not going to be king, mate.
Well, right.
That's the reason you got the job.
But there's almost this a taboo against questioning Charles and William, right, on anything to do with Andrew, as if they're not representatives of this incredibly powerful institution. If they are representatives of this incredibly powerful state institution, then why shouldn't they ask questions about the behavior of another one of its senior members, especially when, as you've just outlined, there is so much convincing evidence that a lot of people within that institution knew about this. We had William go on BBC a few days ago. He spoke about mental health charity work that he does. Some people criticised the BBC for not questioning him about Andrew. I think that there was some defence made that this was not a news show that he was on. You know, he was there to talk about something different. Listen, I'm a journalist. You're a journalist. Think about this. There's a massive story to do with Andrew Epstein, the arrest, everything. William is at BBC. You are a BBC News journalist. You are running a news desk. Why on earth wouldn't you send a journalist down to doorstep him when he leaves the building? Why not? I mean, why is that absurd? But as I say it, I know that it will never, ever happen. The BBC would never, ever do that. Why not? That is journalism. And again, as the public face of a really powerful institution alongside alongside King Charles, I do not see why William and Charles should not be made to answer questions, because this is not a story about, you know, the playboy uncle. This is a story about a powerful institution, and there are questions to be answered about what it knew and when it knew it.
Yeah, I keep saying this. There's two. I mean, there's many arguments against hereditary monarchy. So the key one is that it's incredibly unfair. You know, if we believe that we live in a country or society where everyone is born equal, then the idea that you can, by virtue of your bloodline, become a very powerful person is offensive. But the more pragmatic reason is that the wrong person might get the job, right? If you don't have a process of selecting people, if it's just by the accident of birth, you might get a real wrong one in the job. And if there's any proof of that, it is Andrew. So I think he's sort of like an argument against the monarchy in and of itself, as well as just against this particular rather strange family. We'll have to wrap up there. Thank you, Barry, for joining me this evening.
Thanks, Michael.
Put your invoice in the
I'll
post.
try and remember.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Come back on Monday for another live stream from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.